Respond to the speech from the throne. I think the member who just spoke mentioned this being about choices. That was a theme of the throne speech, and I think the key kind of line from that is when Lieutenant Governor, and I got it right this time, which is great. The cumulative impact of making different choices is paying off. And I think that if we wanted to summarize maybe the leitmotif of our government, it's that. Of course, the fact that we do have an NDP government in Alberta was in May 2015. The people of Alberta decided that they wanted to make a different choice. They'd been told for decades that the refrain was this person called Tina. Right? I mean, our predecessors like to talk about Tina all the time. Tina was one of Klein's favorite people. Of course, Tina refers to there is no alternative. And the message that Albertans have been told for many years was that there was only one party that could govern the province, and there was only one way of doing things. And the sort of sad irony of that is that way of doing things was pretty much the opposite of many other jurisdictions. In that the kind of choices we've made in the past would be, I guess you could characterize it as reverse Keynesianism. And so classic Keynesianism is the idea that there are going to be boom and bust cycles. That's something that comes with our free market system. But the government does have a very important role in evening that out, and they do that by spending more money, borrowing money if necessary during a downturn in order to keep the economy from continuing to sink, and then they start to work to restrain spending carefully and responsibly once the economy starts to recover. In Alberta, we tended to do it the opposite way. So when the economy started tanking, the idea was, what we need to do is we need to cut spending. We need to slash infrastructure. We need to cut back on maintenance. We need to start laying off teachers. We need to start laying off nurses. And the refrain is, yes, it's really unfortunate. It's too bad, but there is no alternative. Now, of course, early spring of 2015. Premier Prentice had, proposed his budget, which was very much framed that way. That, we have no alternative. We need to freeze or roll back spending, and we need to increase a whole bunch of user fees, things that even at the time they'd know would slow down critical sectors of our economy, such as the real estate sector and, the energy sector. It just sort of goes on. And I think Albertans made a wise choice at that point and said, we've had enough. Right? We've given you guys 44 years, and this is the best that you can provide for us. This is what you're telling us. And I think that the last few years have shown that Albertans, despite what some of the opposition says, that Albertans do know what they're about and that they made the right choice. And I think that where we are today as a province reflects that. We're leading the country in growth. We're the first out. And although there's a long ways to go, and I think nobody here pretends otherwise, definitely all the numbers and all the indicators show that we are definitely on the right track. And one of the first rules, and I think one of the other members alluded to it, but maybe I'll take a different spin on it, is that when you're in a hole, the first thing you want to do is stop digging. Now, you could characterize that as stop digging is to spend resources, but another way to look at stop digging is not to make things worse, and that's sort of the first step, I think, and then to incent recovery, and it's going to be a different type of recovery based on different understandings. Another choice that our predecessors made, and that the new rebranded, incarnation are making is this conception that the government really can't do anything to help diversify the economy. that you just have to leave these things up to the market. And, you know, the market always, you know, always knows best. The problem with that is that what do you do when the market puts you in a way where you're just dependent on just a few commodities and you don't have any recourse if they start to collapse? I mean, one interesting discussion I had, just a idea of this sort of attitude, was, I won't mention who it is, but I did speak to a high-ranking member of the previous government, and I asked him the question, so how is it you guys didn't have a ministry for economic development? Like, why didn't you have, officials that are working, directly on diversifying our economy? And the response I got was, sort of like, well, we didn't need one. Right? I mean, that's, I'm not sure, how far-sighted that was. And, we're not making that same mistake. And so what we're choosing to do is we're choosing to use the power of government to make investments happen where otherwise they wouldn't. And key part of that, and probably happy to see that referred to in the budget, is the petroleum diversification program. If we hadn't, and it's a wonderful program because, of course, if the projects don't go ahead, it doesn't cost the taxpayer a dime. And in fact, the credits being provided probably be paid for by property taxes and income taxes before it's even complete. So I mean, it's an ideal program, and it managed to bring Alberta back into consideration for these types of projects because for many years people didn't think about Alberta for petrochemical diversification. And I'm happy to report that that has changed in a big way. And with a lot of interest, I've spoken to companies and individuals from jurisdictions like Texas and other areas that are actively looking in Alberta, and what's bringing them in? The wonderful work that they're seeing happening, in the industrial heartland. I mean, basically, now that we're going to be having a supply of polypropylene, that opens up a lot of doors for us too. And so that's a choice we make. I mean, and that's why people elect the government, is to make these types of choices that are going to benefit people, rather than pretending they don't have a choice. Right? There is an alternative, and I think that whatever else happens in the future, we've shown Albertans that there is another way of doing things, and and I think that what it means is that in the future they're going to be a little bit harder to fool. Talk about another thing where making choices would be. We go back to the last big recession, or of course the Klein government, which our opposition tend to pump up that this was a great thing. I mean, that was a choice about, once again, pretending there was no choice when there were. And the sad part is in that situation it was done quite intentionally. Basically the idea was that our deficit was totally out of control, and we had to hack spending, or the province is going to go bankrupt. Now, I'm sure some of the members remember an individual named Kevin Taft. Now, at that time, Kevin Taft blew the whistle on that approach, and basically, I don't know if you need to table this or not, but basically said the fix is in. The types of small cuts and incremental approach that had been done by the Getty administration had slayed the deficit dragon, and that we did not have to have massive and brutal cuts. And under Klein, they set that aside, and instead they went to Albertans and they told Albertans there is no alternative, we're going bankrupt, we need to slash and burn. And then with that came a lot of the other issues that we're dealing with to this day. So they used it as, there is no alternative. We have to privatize services. We have to privatize Alberta transportation. We have to privatize registries. We have to privatize liquor stores. I mean, some of these changes, maybe they're good. Some of those, maybe we're starting to regret. But I mean, it was done under that. And my suspicion is that if the opposition changes sides with us, after the next election, it's going to be very much that narrative. I mean, right now, they're basically claiming that they can do, well, let's just say that if they have a magic formula for how you can, continue infrastructure spending, cut taxes, reduce the deficit, and do that with no impact to frontline services, I'd like to see that magic formula. Now, of course, one thing, the Jose Machina that the leader of the opposition has proposed is, well, we're just going to take the government to court over equalization payments. I don't know if they're still saying that because their messaging keeps changing, but I think that they know very well that they're not going to succeed. Just as the leader of the opposition and the members of his caucus say that, and we're also going to repeal the carbon tax. This is despite the understanding that is out there that this is definitely something that the federal government can make promises do. So why would they say these things when they know that they can't do them? Because they want to be able to be all things to all people until after they get elected, and then guess what they're going to be saying? There is no alternative. And you're going to be then they're going to be able to do the types of cuts and, the slash and burn, which in some ways, the last round of that in a major way the province is still recovering from. It's about choices. The other choice would be the opposition likes to talk about that we let rural Albertans down. We made a much different choice than they did in a similar situation where we didn't download our deficit problems onto municipalities. We've maintained MSI funding, we've even advanced it, and I guess I kind of wish that the member from, is it Sundre Rocky Mountain House? Rocky Mountain House had, he'd quoted like 3 lines, I think, or 3 words from an article in the Smoky Lake Signal, taken out of context, of course, but that's just fine, but, I wish that he'd kept on reading, because at that same meeting, and the member from Lac-La-Biche Two Hills was present as well, so he can actually see that there. This is from the mayor of Smoky Lake, was also at the meeting, and this is from the article. All right. After his report, the town of Smoky Lake's mayor, Hank Olowaychuk, expressed his appreciation to the NDP government and to Piquet for looking at the rural crime issue, ensuring the stability of the MSI funding, and ensuring that the agriculture societies have the funding they need as well. All positive moves, and we appreciate you guys, he said. He then goes on to mention a couple infrastructure projects that all of us wanted to see, that he was disappointed they didn't see them. But that was really the outcome of that meeting, and that's really the type of reaction to the direction we're going in, reflecting the throne speech, reflecting the budget that I'm seeing out there. I guess the other choice is the ones by the member from Banff Cochrane alluded to, was the choice to fund rural crime, the rural crime initiative. I have to say that I am really nonplussed. When I talk to RCMP, staff sergeants, constables, actually I just spoke to an officer from Ardrossan just this morning and asked them their opinion about the rural crime initiative. I get very, very different interpretation of what it means than what the opposition is presenting here. What they tell me is that they think this is the way to go, that being able to bring in additional resources in problem situations to be able to nip that problem in the bud is like a solution that makes sense to them, that as a matter of fact, providing more support for civilian staff so they can be out in the community more, so they can actually leverage existing resources, makes perfect sense, and they're excited about these crime reduction units. And I don't seem to hear much concern about recruitment into them. It's on the contrary, this type of posting is going to be something that's going to be very attractive to ambitious RCMP officers, because of course they get the opportunity to investigate. And so now, what was that was our choice. Now, what was their choice? Well, they keep criticizing us, but I've yet to hear any sort of a rural crime strategy, or at least one that has anything to do with the province. The last I heard, they were waiting for a year before they would propose something. And so I don't think that I don't think Albertans. Oh, I guess I'm out of time.
Honourable member, just a request to please table any articles you've quoted from. Thank you. The honourable member for Carson Taber Warner on 29-2A.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I listened to the member from Athabasca Sturgeon Redwater, he was referencing an economist, John Maynard Keynes, and it's interesting because I appreciate that he's read and studied past economic models, but Keynesian economic model states that you buy your way out of your troughs, but as you get out of the recession, you save so that for the next one. And the reality is, Madam Speaker, we have now decades where we've been able to study these models. And unfortunately, there's actually been very little evidence that any of the governments that follow a Keynesian economic model actually save during the times that are the good times. And so to base the government's policies, base the government's go-forward strategy on an economic model that has been proven to be ineffective in being able to accomplish the second part of that model, which is saving for that rainy day when the economy goes into recession again, is folly. Now, I get the idea, and I've heard it many times from the government side, that they had to make choices, that they had to choose whether or not they were going to tighten their belt or whether they were going to spend their way out. Again, every Keynesian economic strategist would say that's the right approach. The problem is that the original strategy that they had, that the government had, was at this point, and they did recognize this right from the beginning, and I take my hat off to them for recognizing the problem that we were facing. Right from the beginning, their approach was we would quickly inject quantitative easing, whatever they want to call it, into the economy in order to be able to try to pull us out of that recession quickly. So at this point, based upon their strategy, or the Keynesian economic strategy, at this point they should be a positive. This year should have been a positive figure. And then they would show positive figures going into the future, which would fulfill that second part of the Keynesian economic model, which is always saving for the next time that it goes into the trough. So I do have a question, and I'm going to let the member have the opportunity to respond. I want him to be able to help this side of the House understand if they do have a plan of being able to get to that point where they actually do pay off or start to pay down that debt that they've accumulated, which is to the tune of about $96 billion from their own numbers.
Member?
All right. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to answer the member's question. Now, we do have a path to balance, and now, of course, we can't predict the future. I mean, these are plans, these are guidelines, but I mean, we would be running a balanced budget by 2023, and and then that would be the time. Now, of course, there's another factor to this, which is that over time, as long as the economy keeps growing, the debt becomes smaller relative to the overall economy. And I mean, that's we look at other jurisdictions that run debts. Well, I mean, the United States has carried a national debt, I think, since the Civil War. But they're maybe not a good situation now. But when they were growing, it was not seen as a big issue because it was small proportional to the overall economy. And so now, as we go into the future, you know, we're bringing spending into balance. The productive potential of the economy is increasing as well. Therefore, we're getting more tax revenue. We've made some very, very conservative assumptions about this. The other thing that can prevent, and I know what his concern is, because of course, until recently, he was a member of quite a different party, and he was a member of a party that, in fact, you know, came up and partly to concerns over the progressive conservative. Oh, I wish I could. Next time.
Any other members wishing to speak to the speech from the throne?